All right, let's dive into one of the strangest, most unbelievable conflicts in all of modern history. We're talking about a time when a country, with a straight face, officially declared war on birds.
I mean, you have to ask, right? Could a modern army with machine guns and trained soldiers actually lose a war to a bunch of birds? It sounds like a bad joke, but back in 1932, this question got put to the test. And the answer? Well, it was pretty humiliating.
So how in the world did we get to a point where soldiers were pointing machine guns at emus? Well, to understand that, we've got to rewind a few years, to a time when the entire global economy was falling apart.
It all really kicks off with the 1929 stock market crash over in New York. That event sent these massive shockwaves around the world. The US stopped buying stuff, global trade just dried up, and for a country like Australia that depended on selling things like wool and wheat, it was a disaster. Farmers especially were getting hit hard. They were facing total ruin, just utter desperation.
And just when these struggling farmers thought things absolutely could not get any worse, a new problem shows up. A very, very large and very hungry problem that was about to become a national enemy.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar, the emu is this massive bird native to Australia. We're talking up to 2 meters tall, weighing around 45 kilograms, and they're always on the move, always looking for their next meal. And get this, these birds are seriously formidable. They can sprint up to 50 kilometers an hour. To put that in perspective, that is faster than Usain Bolt at his absolute peak. These things are basically feathered tanks, and they're built for speed.
Okay, so just try to picture this. You're a farmer, you're already on the verge of losing everything, and then you see this number coming over the horizon. 20,000 emus, all following their migration patterns, and they just descend on the wheat fields of Western Australia. For the emus, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. For the farmers, it felt like a plague of biblical proportions.
So these emus are just trampling everything, smashing through fences that were supposed to keep rabbits out, which, just let even more pests in. The farmers were at their absolute breaking point. They begged the government for help, and that led to a decision that would go down in history for all the wrong reasons.
They didn't just ask for some financial aid. Nope. They specifically asked for the military to come in. They wanted the army with guns to solve their bird problem. And the craziest part? The government actually said yes.
You can't make this up. The official reasoning from the Minister of Defense, a guy named George Pierce, was just bizarre. He figured, hey, this is great target practice for the soldiers. And, oh yeah, maybe we can make some cool hats out of the emu skins. As if that wasn't enough, the farmers actually had to pay for the bullets themselves. And this wasn't some quiet, behind-the-scenes thing. Oh no, the newspapers went wild with it. They framed it exactly as it was. Australia had officially declared war on the emus. The stage was set. Man versus bird. It seemed like it was going to be the most one-sided fight in history. Or so they thought. So the Royal Australian Artillery sends in their 7th Heavy Battery. They're armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. What happened next was, well, a masterclass in military failure. And it was delivered by birds.
The first major fight was called the Battle of Campion. The soldiers saw a flock, they set up their machine guns, and they were probably thinking this was going to be an easy day's work. But the emus, they just didn't play along. Instead of panicking and running straight into the gunfire, they scattered. They instantly broke up into these small, unpredictable groups running every which way. It was impossible to get a beat on them. The soldiers literally called it an intelligent retreat. They were completely outsmarted.
The commanding officer was just blown away. He actually compared the emus to tanks. He said they had this incredible mobility, and that even when they got hit with bullets, they would just keep on running. The army was facing an enemy they were completely unprepared for. Okay, so, round 2. The soldiers decide to get clever. They find a huge flock, over 1,000 emus, near a dam, and they set up a perfect ambush. This has to work, right? You've got 1,000 targets basically cornered. Nope, wrong again. After the ambush was sprung and the guns went quiet, the final body count was 12. Just 12 emus, out of more than 1,000. At one point, they even tried mounting the machine guns on trucks, but that failed too, because the emus could literally outrun the vehicles on the rough terrain. So after about a week of this, the army had fired off thousands and thousands of rounds and had killed maybe a couple hundred emus if they were lucky. The press was having an absolute field day, just mocking the whole thing. It was a national embarrassment. So, facing all this public ridicule, the Minister of Defense ordered a full withdrawal. Round 1 goes to the emus.
But, of course, the war wasn't over. The second the soldiers left, the emus went right back to raiding the crops. The farmers protested again, and believe it or not, just a few days later, the military was sent back in for round 2.
Now this time around, the army was a little more successful. But successful is a relative term. They were killing maybe 100 emus a week. But just look at these numbers. By the time the whole operation was finally called off, they'd killed just under 1,000 birds, out of an initial population of 20,000. It was barely a dent. The army tried to declare victory, but come on, everyone knew who really won.
So the military campaigns were an absolute, undeniable failure. It's a perfect example of trying to solve a complex ecological problem with machine guns. It just doesn't work. But the emu problem didn't go away, so the government finally ditched the army and turned to a much more effective and, frankly, much more brutal solution.
They put a price on their heads. They started a bounty system, basically paying civilians and farmers for every emu they killed. And this completely changed the game. The war went from being this formal, clumsy military operation to a long, sustained, decentralized slaughter.
And the results of this new strategy were just staggering. Between 1945 and 1960, this bounty system led to the killing of over 285,000 emus. It was a brutal campaign that made the Army's earlier attempts look like a joke, and it had a truly devastating impact on the emu population for decades.
So that brings us back to the big question, right? Who really won the Great Emu War? The Army was completely humiliated, there's no question there. But the bounty system was devastatingly effective. And yet, despite all of it, the depression, the military assault, the decades-long bounty, the emu as a species is still here. They're not endangered. They survived it all. So who really won? Maybe, just maybe, the real victory belongs to the ridiculously resilient bird that proved it was tougher